Hello everybody, it's Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by David Arnold. On today's episode we will talk extensively about his inspiring work on Good Omens, for which he also received 2 Emmy Award nominations. Welcome, David.
Thank you very much for having me.
So great to have you, it's a pleasure. David, before we talk about Good Omens, I would love to talk about your early career, and you had started out in 1990, also scoring short films, and by 1994 you had worked on The Young Americans, and shortly thereafter you started working with Roland Emmerich on Stargate, Independence Day, and also Godzilla. How did your collaboration with Roland come about back then?
It was a little bit long-winded, but I'd done my first feature film called The Young Americans, and it was partially funded by Canal Plus, the French TV and I suppose it's streaming now, but then it was like cable company. And one of the producers for Canal Plus was in the middle of setting up a production arm with Carolco Films in Hollywood, and this guy had seen The Americans and liked it and liked the score, and he suggested to Mario Casar, who was him and Andy Vanu were sort of running Carolco, that they might want to look at Danny Cannon as a director for one of their next films, and also as me as a composer, just as a possibility. So I mean, I was literally working out of a bedroom, and the Young Americans hadn't really come out when we went to see Mario in Hollywood at his house, and we showed him the film and he liked it, and I went home and I thought that was that. I mean, I didn't have any money, and I was trying to get a job in a like a VHS video store in London, because I was doing all sorts of odd jobs when I was doing all these student films. And then about 2 weeks later, I got a phone call saying that they had a film in production called Stargate, and they'd be interested in talking to me about it. And they sent me a script, and I had some ideas for it. And then they flew me over to meet Roland and Dean at the offices in Carolco very early on, before they'd started shooting anything. And I think Roland had really only made Moon 44. I think it was his sort of big entry into sort of feature films. Oh no, he did that. What was that one with? It wasn't Rutger Hauer. It was
Universal Soldier. He also did.
Universal Soldier. Yeah. So Roland's previous films were Moon 44 and Universal Soldier. So I watched them and I thought, okay, visually, very, very creative. And the script just made me think of sort of Star Wars and Lawrence of Arabia, and it's very unusual, and one of the great what ifs. And one thing I learned about Roland over the years was that he was great with the what if kind of idea. What if we uncovered a gateway to the Egyptians underneath the pyramids? What if a 25-mile wide spaceship appeared over every capital city in the world? And those things you get like, yeah, what if? I want to see a film where it says what if that happens. And so they asked me to do it. I mean, it was a very, very unusual thing because I didn't really have a track record. I didn't really have the pedigree, I suppose, to take on a film of that scale and size. But it was amazing that he did. So they all took a chance on it, and I think it worked out incredibly well because I loved the film. I love working with Roland and with Dean, and it was a big fantasy film, which means that you're kind of off the leash. It's you can sort of do anything you want because the world isn't real. You don't have to ground it in a sort of reality. You have to be serious about what you're doing and take what's happening seriously. But it's not the same as a film about slavery or like sort of real world issues. It's an escapist science fiction fantasy adventure, and on that grounds it was brilliant to work on, and still very much loved, which is great.
Absolutely. I mean, those scores have become so popular, and I think those three scores which you wrote for Roland, they really stand out also in your filmography because I think those scores are tremendous.
Well, you're very kind.
And how
But
did you?
but
Yeah,
when you get a canvas like that, when you get offered these, I mean, they were enormous films, so in a way, I think it very much played to my strengths at the time, which is big thematic material, lots and lots of energy and tunes, just I really like melody, and you can write a theme for characters, you can write a theme for the film. It wasn't something that hid away from what it was. It just said, this is the sort of film that I am. Take it or leave it. So there was a great sort of brash, exuberant flamboyance to those films. They were funny and slightly silly in times, and visually, very exciting. So for a composer, those are great gifts to be given, because you literally can take the blinkers off and go anywhere you like.
that's very true. I mean, all the hard work totally paid off. I mean, I love those scores, especially Independence Day.
It was a lot of work, but the odd thing about doing films is that you do it on your own. You're largely on your own. You don't really see many people. You don't see that. I remember watching the end credits of Independence Day go past, which are like 9.5, 10 minutes long.
Yep.
And I don't know, I had 2,500 people maybe on that end credit roller, and I'm thinking like, well, I've met three of these or four of them. We don't really see that many people. We're sort of locked away. So when something, sort of crosses over from the film itself into the wider world in another way, it's a really lovely thing to do, because that's what you want music to do.
Yes.
You want it to reach people in all sorts of ways. And the fact that Stargate, has had re-releases and inspired that, the TV show, which ran for so long, and Independence Day, is still hugely popular in screenings. We've done a couple of Independence Day live with the orchestra, which is really exciting. It's a the end credit suite turns up in a lot of film music concerts as well, and
Yes.
that's a great thing, because then sitting alongside proper great work, and I think it just all comes down to being a tune. Like, people just like a melody, don't they? They like a good theme. They like to point at it and go, that's Independence Day, or that's James Bond, or
Very
that's
true.
Sherlock Holmes. They want to be able to identify it. And there's not that, it's a very very limited audience, I think, for 5M16 version 4 R3, with some sort of ambient background texture under a conversation. People like theme, and size and scale, like in the same way that they like big singers. I'm not saying that it's the only way to do it, but there's a very obvious attraction to people doing something well, and something that can be recognized and felt, and not spectacularly intellectual. And some films demand that approach, and some films don't. You just want an honest emotional response to it. Like
Yeah.
Roland's films were all about, it felt like a firework display. Everything was kind of spectacular, but it just depends on how big each explosion was. So it was great fun.
David, may I ask why you didn't return for Independence Day Resurgence?
Well, they just didn't ask. It was as simple as that. I mean, Roland has got a fantastic working relationship with Harold now, and Harold works as a composer as well as a sort of producer and co-writer. So they obviously have a very healthy, relationship with each other. And I mean, it's one thing that I discussed with Roland frequently at the time, was that I have no expectation about being brought back again for anything, any more than you would cast the same actor in your film again and again and again. And I know sometimes that happens. People have relationships with actors, and they come back to them again and again. But sometimes, they never. You get an amazing performance out of someone in one movie and never use them again because you look for something different. So Roland was obviously looking for something different, and Harold is the guy who's doing all that for him. Has done for a very long time now. So they've got a very long, well-established relationship. So yeah, I mean, I didn't know anything about that until it had happened. But I've met Harold, and he's a lovely boy. We had good fun together somewhere I think we're in Vienna. I think I was picking up an award on behalf of John Barry at the time. I think we met an American ambassador's house. Some a very unusual place, but he wrote me a very, very nice letter saying that would it be okay if they used some of the sort of theme things from Independence Day for the new one. I mean, I didn't have any control over it, but it was very gracious of him to mention it to me. So
Yes, sure.
yeah, I mean, it's like you can't. It's like telling people, why didn't you stay married to that person? It's like there comes a point when he goes like, if someone says, you know what, I want to do something different. It's a creative world, it's like
Yeah,
I use different. I work with different people all the time, and
sure.
it's funny. I mean, I think I've only ever seen Roland once since we finished doing all that stuff. I think at a screening of his Shakespeare movie,
Okay.
but that was it.
Okay. Well, of course, I mean it's good for Harold to have a lasting relationship with Roland, but of course the film music community, let's say, was very disappointed.
Sure. I mean, you have to trust the director to make the choices for the film that they've made, the right choices for the film that they've made.
Yes.
And when I was working with Roland, I trusted his decision making on what we were doing then, and you would have to trust someone's decision making when it comes to crewing up, for
Yes.
casting their movie with people that they think are right for the film. It's not a personal thing. It's
Yes, sure.
it's like I'd like a different flavor, and it's like if you're a pig, you're not going to taste like beef. It's like if you're a duck, you're not going to taste like chicken, and if someone wants chicken, they're not going to order a duck. So this is reducing it to a ridiculous level, but
Yeah.
but you know what I mean. It really is completely up to a director who he decides to work with, and the last thing you'd want to do as a composer is to be sat alongside someone who doesn't really want you there. That would be awful. So for me, for those things to work, you've got to like the person, you've got to like what they're doing, and
Yes.
believe that what they're doing is right. But no, I didn't hear from anyone about the remakes. Obviously, I read about them, and I think I bumped into Jeff Goldblum once. But I mean, it's great when films are so successful that you can make another one of them.
Yes, sure.
I'm very pleased to have been a part of that original.
It's the same situation with James Bond. You had scored 5 James Bond movies, then a different Sam Mendes directed 2, and he had worked with Thomas Newman, and then
Yes.
Thomas was hired, and now we have another director.
Yes.
Have you at some point considered returning to the James Bond world, or are you done with Bond?
No, I mean, I've never said I wouldn't, and I've always said if I was asked, I would, and that stays the same. It's I do a lot of things with Eon, outside of the film things. We do sort of charity things and all sorts of bits and pieces. So I'm sort of involved. I'm still involved with them quite a lot, and I see them frequently. And I would hope to think that they were friends. I do love them like a family. And I'm of the same opinion of that. It's like I want to be in that chair if the guy who's driving is saying I want you to be in the chair. But if he said, you know what, it's like this, I want this guy to do it because of all the reasons why you would choose to have someone to do it. You have very good reasons when you want a composer because it's such an emotional responsibility. So I mean, I did meet with Sam once very early on, and I mean, I realised, I did say to him that, I was extremely grateful for him just to meet me, but I had full expectation that he would use Tom, because Tom's his guy and Tom's a genius, so it was really just to say this isn't an issue at all, and they were very nice to let us meet just so we could talk about it, and it really wasn't, and it still isn't, because I've done 5. That's an amazing thing, and if someone asked me to do another one, yeah, of course I would. I mean, I love the films, I love the idea of the films, I love the music. I still think there's work to be done in that area, as far as I'm concerned.
Yes.
It felt like with Quantum of Solace, there was we took a turn that was getting quite interesting, and but it's you say, sorry to say this, but never say never again.
Yes.
Like you'd be daft to say I'd never do it. And each case, you have to take each case as it comes. But I mean, I do things for Barbara and Michael with music, reasonably frequently. And the most recent. Well, actually, it wasn't the most recent, but we've been doing Casino Royale live with a live orchestra.
Yes.
And that's been going around, dozens of performances of that. And that was lovely just to get back into hearing that again, and digging all that out, and realizing that it's still James Bond, and they're still using the end title James Bond theme version in Sam's films as well. So I still felt like I was a little bit connected to that at the same time. So. But I mean, I'm fascinated as to what happens on this one. But I've always said, it's like I'd be in the audience. I'll be in the audience, as I always have been before I started doing them, wanting it to be amazing. That's what I think. What everyone wants. They want to sit down and see an amazing Bond film, and it'll be Daniel's last one. And who knows what they're going to do in that film. But what I'm happiest about a Bond film is right at the end when it says James Bond will return.
Yes.
as long as that keeps coming up, I'll be happy, because I never get tired of them.
Sure. I mean, I'm sure there will be plenty of more Bond films to come in the not so distant future, and maybe someday you will return to score a James Bond adventure. Let's hope so.
Well, I have my special James Bond pencil, which is sharp, and it is kept in a little glass case in case ever I need to break into it. So it's always there.
Great. And David, as of 2010, you had kind of stepped away a little from the film world, and you focused a little more on TV series, and most recently you scored Good Omens, which was produced by Amazon Studios and also the BBC Studios.
Yes.
Do you think that a TV series, which encompasses, let's say, 5 episodes or 10 episodes, allows you to elaborate more on your musical ideas? Is there more freedom to write?
Well, I'm thinking, like, what have I done in terms of episodic TV of that nature? I mean, the closest I suppose would be Sherlock, but they are more like sort of 3 movies. It's 3 90-minute films, independent stories, not really a through story, like there is with a series that's on TV that's 10 episodes, where you get to the end of episode 1 and then you want to find out what happened, so you watch episode 2 and then you have to watch episode 3. With Sherlock's, they're all standalone stories. You can watch them in and out of sequence, it doesn't matter. They have a sort of start, a beginning and an end, and that's that story sort of pretty much dealt with. I mean, there are some sort of character arcs which obviously change, but you can quite easily watch them independently of each other and still have as good a time. And Good Omens was not like that. Good Omens was like a 6-hour film, and because it has a beginning and a middle and an end, but that is over the 6 hours. It's like Sherlock's, the beginning and the middle and the end were within the 90 minutes, and so you had 3 beginnings, the 3 middles, the 3 ends in those series of 3. But Good Omens was like one very long film, and it's chock-a-block full of characters, and obviously it happens everywhere. It happens everywhere today, tomorrow, in the past. In heaven, in hell. There are even aliens in it. There's very little left in the world that didn't have something to do with Good Omens. And so that's why I sort of felt about that it was a 6-hour film. And I think what was important when you're doing something like that is that it has a central kind of spine, a central sort of emotional musical skeleton that everything else can grow from and hang off and rely on. And that was really what the theme was. It was the thing which said, "This is Good Omens." It was the Macy's shop window. It was the thing. It was the thing that makes you, when you walk past it, it completely catches your eye, and you want to know what's inside. And so you go in. That's what an good opening sequence should be, I think. So there are lots of thematic ideas, lots of characters, lots of textures, lots of styles, but hopefully overall you had the sense of it being a complete work. And I think that's true of the show as well.
Yes.
The fact that it takes place in all these different places, it's sort of anchored by the Aziraphale and Crowley relationship. That seems to be the center of it. The world is reflected from that relationship, but that relationship is really what it's all about. So that was what I grabbed onto, and that was what I clung onto through the production, and decorated from there, really. But it really was. It was a show where I was encouraged to go as far as I wanted, and then go further. If you felt if it wasn't weird enough, make it weirder. Make it stranger. Make it more unusual. Just do different things. And it was such a relief in a way to do a project where you are completely and utterly trusted with it. There were no indications or directions as to say, I want it to sound like this, or I want it to be like this. It was just, this is how we want to feel, and how you do that is up to you. So it was quite remarkable and very unusual to be given that amount of freedom to be creative. But I think I've discovered that when that happens, creative people usually do best. When you can just think about the possibilities rather than think about what 10 people are going to think about the possibilities. It's just you and the work and the show, and that's the relationship. It's very direct. And to have to worry about what a producer that you've never met who lives in another country might think about the sound of an oboe at a certain point, that sort of thing can cripple you creatively, because then you start second guessing your own instincts, and that's when it becomes sort of tedious and hard work and joyless. But this was the complete opposite of that.
Great. And now you're up for two Emmy Awards for best outstanding main title and best music. And watching the show, I realized that there is an extensive main title sequence which you scored, which is a very good thing, because on many occasions the main title is kept very short.
Yeah.
Could you tell me a bit about how you found that very first idea when you said, okay, this could be the main title?
Yeah, well, the first idea actually was the first creative thing that I actually had to write for the show. I'd done lots of bits and pieces of arranging different songs and stuff that had to be performed in the show. The arrangement of Lazing on a Sunday Afternoon for a brass band in the last episode, which was a Queen song. I think that was the first thing that I actually did, and that was an arrangement. And then originally the title sequence was going to be Every Day by Buddy Holly. That was in the script. So there wasn't going to be an original title piece in terms of music. It was going to be a title sequence over the music of Buddy Holly singing, every day it's getting closer, So that sort of worked very much sort of in tone against the idea of a coming apocalypse. So it was kind of cute. And also, every day it's getting closer is, a pretty much on the nail tagline for the entire series if you're talking about the end of the world. So it was perfect in one way, but I always, want to write a theme for a show. It's like, it feels like you watch it and you go like, what does that make me feel like? How do I encapsulate that in one go? I mean, great theme music writing, I think, manages to do that, like Mission Impossible or Star Trek somehow, Doctor Who, like any of these things, the Persuaders, they all capture the essence of the show, and it's almost like you don't have to watch it, you can just listen to it and know what it's about. And so I've always wanted to do title sequences, and I asked Doug and Neil if they'd let me have a go, because they were working with the Buddy Holly song. So I said, look, this is not, it's not a. I'm asking you to let me do it, and I'll be really offended if you say you don't like it. I'm asking you because I think it's important that we establish this show as its own world, in its own world, with its own identity, and that we don't have to, take things from everywhere else. We've already got some of the Queen songs in the show anyway.
Yes.
So so the first thing I actually had to write, it was all a bit last minute. There was a scene where David Tennant's character Crowley has to sing a lullaby to the Antichrist to try and get him to go to sleep,
Yes.
and they had to shoot David singing this, obviously. So I had to write it in readiness for him to shoot it, and it was only a couple of days away. And I had a conversation with Neil about it, and I was saying, well, it's a lullaby. I said, I always like the great kind of, the sort of Disney lullabies that I love so much, like Baby Mine in Dumbo, and the lullaby in Mary Poppins, and Hushabye Mountain in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. These sort of these wonderful kind of whimsical, beautiful, innocent melodies about being able to go to sleep. And I love the idea that you've got a demon, telling the Antichrist that, making him feel better by telling him that when the world's destroyed and covered in blood and brains, he will rule it. But in a way that makes him feel comfortable and cute and secure. So I said, like, it's basically, if Walt Disney was possessed by Satan, that's what we're looking at. So I asked Neil if he would write some words, and so he wrote those words, and sent them to me, and I sort of did it in an hour, really. And I sent it back to them, and they liked it. So that's what was shot. That's what David was singing. But I kept singing that to myself. It was a very, very, it was a melody that just appeared almost without any of my control. I sat down and I thought about all those things, and I just started singing and playing, and it was like, oh, that's what came out. And I thought, well, that's obviously it, so let's use that. But over the next couple of days, I just kept thinking about that tune, and I kept thinking it again and again. I thought, like, this is too strong an idea for it to be, in a way, just left behind in a 25-second sequence at the end of the show. Sorry, at the in episode 1, never to be heard again. And it felt like it felt somehow it was an important thing, because actually it's quite a sweet idea. And that's when the idea of maybe we could have the idea of angelic and demonic at the same time. We have this incredibly sweet melody sung about the most awful thing. And maybe that can inform the music generally. For every good thing, there's a bad thing. For every nice instrument, there is a bad version of it as well. When I say bad, slightly corrupt. So in a way, those characters are present constantly. Whenever there's a very sweet solo violin, there is a version of it underneath which is grimy and dirty and messy and broken, and you can barely hear it, but it's there. So it's that, it's like almost like they were musically each other's conscience, and then I just thought about that kind of uncontrollable twirling, whirling. The thing about the show is that it feels like there's no stopping it. The apocalypse is coming, and they're not sure if they're going to be able to stop it. In fact, they don't really know until the end of episode 6. So the whole thing is like an out of control, roller coaster, and it made me think of sort of fairgrounds and being thrown around and not really knowing what you're supposed to grab onto and what you can rely on. And so I thought, that kind of slightly demonic waltz thing is a great beckoning into the world of Good Omens. And in the middle of it, we go to the major key and we sing, we have a boy soprano singing that melody, singing that beautiful lullaby. Except it's not a boy soprano, it's a woman singing it, but it's made to sound like a boy and messed up. So even that's not what you think it is, so everything's a bit off.
Yes, and it feels like all bets are off. It's good versus evil. It's a black or dark comedy with lots of great humorous sequences, which I'm sure were not everybody's cup of tea, because dealing with a subject matter of this kind, you are likely to ruffle some feathers.
Yeah, it might be, but I think, I don't think anyone's having a go at anything. It doesn't appear to be about, it's not about religion. It seems to be about, the most human things of all. It's about caring, and it's about consideration, and it's about optimism, and it's about love and loyalty. At its core, that's what it is, but you're just using these characters to tell that story. That's certainly what I was working with. Everything else is a fiction anyway, so why worry about that? But and in between, even when there were jokes, like at the crucifixion, it wasn't really a joke. It was just another way of illustrating the obscenity of what happens when people lose control of their humanity. It's like they were banging the nails into Christ on the cross, and they said, like, what did he do to make them do this to them? And the answer was he asked everyone to be kind to each other, and that I thought was incredibly poetic.
Yes.
Even though it kind of read as a joke. It's like you sort of laugh and cry at the same time. And I think the show is full of, messages of actual hope and optimism, but it's just cloaked in the idea that the world's going to end,
Yep.
and death is going to envelop all of us, which, of course, at some point it will.
And the scene you just mentioned when he asked why are they crucifying him, and the other character says, well, I guess there was enough or a good enough reason for them to.
Well, he said, yeah, well, that'll do it.
Yeah.
It doesn't take much for people to go to extremes, and when you think it's something as wonderfully innocent and optimistic as be kind to each other, if that message is is perverted by the people hearing it, then that's when you get awful things happening. And within 2 lines, you've got that entire sentiment delivered. And in a way, scoring that was the most, I suppose, the most serious thing, because we wanted to be very respectful of what was happening. So I tried to score that as honestly as I could. If that had been a film about Christ and that scene had been there, then that's what I would have done, I think. So you've got to be honest with yourself and honest to the story.
You had to balance quite a few elements when you scored this series. I mean, comedic elements, apocalyptic scenarios. You scored music for the Antichrist. Has this series, presented any challenges, or have you encountered any challenges which you didn't have to face before?
Yes, the trickiest one. I mean, all those things that you say don't feel like challenges; they feel like great opportunities. I mean, there wasn't a point when it's like, David, you've got to write for God and the Antichrist and the angels and demons and Beelzebub and Gabriel and the Roman Empire and Shakespeare. These are things that you dream about being able to write for when you write. Like, it's like an actor. It's like, okay, you're going to play all these amazing characters. You might think in your life, you know, God, I'd love to play a villain, or I'd love to play a centurion, or I'd love to play a boxer, or I'd love, you know, and someone offers you a movie where you are all of these people. You wouldn't think, oh, that's intimidating. You'd think like, oh, this is like all my dreams come true. So the show was a great opportunity and didn't feel intimidating whatsoever. The trickiest one actually was a very, very, very small incidental moment. And we've been talking about classical music, and Neil was telling me that Terry Pratchett's favorite classical music was the theme by Thomas Tallis. And he was, you know, very keen to somehow have that in the show. And so we found a little spot in the car when Crowley and Aziraphale are driving somewhere, and it's just in the, you know, it's very much in the background, just on the radio. But the twist in it was that because it was in the Bentley, it had to turn into Queen, because everything that's in the Bentley turns into Queen eventually. So we had to go from, you know, a 14th century sort of choral, almost sort of plain song arranged for strings by Thomas Tallis, that had to turn into "We Will Rock You," which is about the most opposite piece of music you can ever think of. So that was, I mean, we did it. It took a day to do it, but it's there. It's in the show, and you can barely hear it. But there are lots of little things like that, like when the four horsemen of the apocalypse come to the cafe to meet with death, and there's like a Motorhead song in the cafe, and for some reason they couldn't get the rights to the Motorhead song, so they asked me if could I do a Motorhead sort of song to go in there. And so spent a day doing this and trying to, you know, screaming my head off and coughing, you know, for the next 2 days, doing one line at a time, growling and screaming and trying to sound like a death metal singer. You know, things like that, which made it really, really fascinating and interesting constantly. There wasn't a day when you weren't doing something new and something fun. And it actually was the most fun I think I've ever had doing anything, because I was encouraged to go as far as I wanted.
I mean, it's a very interesting show, very great series. I had a good time watching it, and I also had a very good time listening to your music, which was thankfully released as a 2-disc set. So
Yeah,
which is great, and I hope, or I wish you best of luck for the Emmy Awards, which will I think air in September.
yes, I think it's about September. Is it the 15th or 12th? 13th? I can't remember. I know it's in September. But yes, I mean, it's lovely to be a part of that crowd, you know, to be in the same room with people like Tom Newman. You know, it's a lovely thing. But you know, it might sound like a cliche, but you know, I actually did enjoy this, working on this so much. It didn't feel like work. It was a lot of hours. It was, you know, I was doing 7 days a week for 6 months solid on the show. There was just so much. It was like 4.25 hours of music, I think. And the turnaround was pretty quick, and we were not able to really do the same thing, you know, more than once. So it was, you know, a lot of new music was written, so there was an awful lot to do. But I did truthfully enjoy every day that I worked on this, and in a way I think it set a bar for how I want to do things in the future, you know, because it was such a positive experience, and I think you can feel that in the music, and it's because the show is the way that it is, and the people, you know, Neil and Doug are the way that they are, and Amazon and the BBC who just left me to do it, you know. And I was, you know, it's not very often you get that amount of faith and trust anymore. Everyone's, you know, sometimes very nervous about
Yes.
everything.
Yeah.
And I think if you've got the right people in the right positions, you know, in your team, then you can just let them play. So nominations are wonderful, but it does feel to me that when I get stuff, I mean, I'm getting a lot of things sent to me on the internet of people around the world learning an instrument so they can play the themes from Good Omens. You know, I mean, that's an extraordinary commitment. You know, people digging out instruments that they haven't played for years in order to try and play it. And, you know, that's incredibly gratifying, because when you write music, it is about connecting. You know, it is about reaching out from your little room where you're doing it to everyone else. And, you know, it's like a sort of hope virus. You know, you sort of hope that everyone sort of gets it and that it arrives in themselves. You hope that the music arrives in the same manner with which it leaves you. And when you see that happening, then you think, okay, that's something we sort of wish for. I think every time you write music, that it lands in the right place and people recognize it for what it is. And so it's been a very, very positive experience, this thing, and makes me realize why I love doing this job.
I hope you get the chance to write many more scores in the future, be it a TV show, be it a film. And I would like to thank you so much for taking so much time out of your busy schedule from me today.
Lovely.
I really had a blast talking to you. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well.
Yeah, fabulous. Thank you so much for thinking of me.
Absolutely. It was a privilege talking to you, and I hope we get to chat again in the future.
Fabulous.
And I wish you all the best, and I hope you have a nice day.
Thank you very much. Speak soon.
Talk soon. Bye, Dave.